Today we're speaking with Andrew Vanderbeek from RACQ. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us at SWOOP Chat Online. Andrew, can you tell me a little bit about RACQ, what it is? For certainly people internationally outside of Australia may not have heard of it. And then can you tell me a little bit about your journey with Yemma, why you implemented Yemma and when?
Sure. So firstly, thank you very much for having me. So RACQ is the Royal Automotive Club of Queensland. We're a very diverse organisation these days. We started first and foremost as an advocacy group for motorists back in 1905. This month we actually celebrate our 115th birthday. And we evolved from there. We became a roadside assistance business for people, for breakdowns and a whole variety of motoring related issues. In the decades since, we have formed an insurance company, and we're one of the larger insurers in Queensland. And we actually merged with a small bank getting on for 3 years ago now. So we actually have a bank as well. So they're our three primary business lines: motoring support, insurance, and a bank. It's a diverse organisation. We have 1.8 million members across Queensland, which means that we actually have a policy or a product of some sort in 70% of all households across our state.
Wow.
Which we're the largest club in Queensland. Everybody knows RACQ. It's a really iconic brand in our state. Very easy place for us to be in terms of brand awareness and recognition. Anybody from Queensland certainly knows who RACQ is. And I suppose in terms of our Yammer journey, I joined the business in 2016. The Yammer community was established. It was still fairly early in its stages at that point. I'd actually used Yammer in a previous organisation, so I came with some prepared knowledge and I guess some understanding about how communities could work. I will say though that, and this is based on advice that I've had from my colleagues and peers in the organisation, ours was not a smooth introduction in so much as Microsoft ostensibly just turned on the Yammer functionality one day, and all of a sudden Yammer became available to people. Our technology team was not expecting it. The internal communications team was not expecting it. There was no preparation, no launch strategy, none of those things. All of a sudden Yammer just existed. And so very quickly people had to understand what Yammer was. And I think that initially, people really didn't know what to make of it. So it was a bit of a rocky start, but very quickly my peers in the team at the time, some of whom have since left, but did a wonderful job in really getting a grasp of what a Yammer community could be, looking out and seeing what best practice had been for a few years prior with different organisations, and just working out how we could make best use of it. I think one thing that made it quite successful once we'd gotten over that initial bump in the road was Queensland is an enormous state. For anybody outside of Queensland, outside of Australia, it's hard to get an understanding of the size. I think
I looked into this. I think it's
yes.
7 times the size of the UK and more than twice the size of Texas, the state of Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
you
big.
you can drive from the southernmost border of Queensland and it will take you 2 days to drive to the northern tip, and that's pretty much driving 24 hours a day. You can drive 4 days in different directions and still be in the state of Queensland. In the time you could drive probably halfway across Europe, you can't get across our state. So we have about 2,500 staff, most of whom are in the southeast corner where our capital city Brisbane is based, and that's where I work. But we do have people working right up the coast, inland to a point as well. So we have a very spread workforce, and many of those people have very infrequent opportunities to come to Brisbane or never come to Brisbane. And Yammer provides an opportunity for them to feel engaged with our community, with peers who are part of the business that they work within, but perhaps don't have regular exposure to in a way that they simply otherwise wouldn't have.
Well, can you expand on that a little bit more? How are they connecting? Are you doing that through things like Yam Jams, or is it just conversations that they're joining in on?
Sure. We do run Yam Jams quite regularly. We actually have, for the first time in 13 years, we have a new group CEO. So he joined our business, I think it was either the week of or the week before coronavirus really hit with impetus in Queensland, and most of our workforce was sent home. So I think it would be fair to say he's probably met about 20 or 30 people in our organisation of 2,500 so far, face to face. We have used numerous opportunities to introduce him to our community virtually, and Yammer has played a big part of that. I've actually chaired two Yam Jams on his behalf and let him pretty much be the Q&A man, but I've been behind the scenes in helping him with addressing some of those inquiries. He's been very open to exploring all avenues to speak with our people. He did also come with some previous exposure to Yammer from the organisation he'd worked with beforehand. But beyond Yam Jams, we do have business units, for example, our insurance business or our retail network, where people do work right across the state. And oftentimes they are part of teams that might have 20 different locations. So they use groups in Yammer, they use topics, they use different threads, all as a means by which to be able to share successes, challenges, questions with one another, and really workshop solutions to things that perhaps the answer is not always immediately clear to them.
Are you using Teams as well as Yemma?
We do use Teams.
Okay.
We certainly do. What I would say is there's been a rapid escalation in its use since, and I don't think I really mentioned before, of our 2,500 people, 90% of us moved to a work from home model in the space of about 3 business days.
Wow. So that was a lot of shop fronts closed, obviously.
Shop fronts closed, yeah, absolutely. In saying that, we do have 1.8 million members who obviously were continuing to rely on us. So we have been able to keep our roadside support network operational, our towing business, insurance assessments have still been able to continue, obviously with social distancing guidelines in place and the appropriate safety measures both for our people and for the members that they're visiting as well.
Andrew, when you were talking about the new group CEO connecting on Yemma, what's the reception been like? Have you been measuring that as well?
It's been fabulous. He has been very busy, obviously, understanding how an organisation of our size operates. So he's had limited time to be on Yammer, but what I would say, aside from the Yam Jams, I have seen him pop up occasionally with comments on particular threads or just simply like things and what have you. And like any other organisation, the impact of a senior leader becoming involved, you can almost see people virtually puff out their chests in pride and really be positive and enthusiastic as a consequence of someone at that level taking an interest in what they're doing. So I look forward to him doing a lot more of that. It is very early days for him yet, but he seems to have an appetite for having a presence on Yammer, absolutely.
Yeah, I particularly like how you said that he'd commented on posts, because you could imagine if you were one of those shopfront workers and your life suddenly changed, you're not going into the office every day, you're not helping people face to face, and then to be able to get a comment from your CEO, I guess it's showing that that's your CEO's listening to those employees as well.
Absolutely. These people they do a remarkable job at the best of times, but they're doing an extraordinary job in really significant adversity for our entire community, putting themselves out there into spaces that, to be honest, they're quite extraordinary, the things that they are doing currently. And I think it is incredibly valuable for not only at our group CEO level, but even a little bit further down the leadership chain, for people to be seeing that their leaders are seeing what they're doing and acknowledging them has been remarkable.
Yeah, I know previously, so RACQ, in our last Yemma benchmarking report, which was late 2019, you guys were one of the top performers in the medium-sized organisations. So, you do have one of the most mature Yemma networks in the world. And we did a case study back then, and you were telling me there was one example. It was 15 days of Trina, and it was an employee who'd been working at RACQ for 15 years. And I remember a lot of what you told me, you and your colleague Bernadette told me at the time, was just this great sense of pride that Yemma was helping to create, because it was connecting people, especially across this enormous geography. Can you expand on that sense of pride across RACQ that is reflected on Yemma?
Absolutely. I'm sure many organisations would say this, and some probably have a very similar experience to people who work at RACQ, but many don't. I think RACQ is a big family for many of our people, it is a big family. We have people who've been with us for remarkable periods of time. We actually celebrated the 50th work anniversary of one of our most esteemed colleagues last year. She started as a 16-year-old. She's still with us. She manages the historic archives for RACQ. And I don't think she'd mind me saying that she does that in large part because she's been here for many of the milestone achievements the organisation has seen over 5 decades. But she is the extreme outlier. But it is incredible how many people, I couldn't count how many people have been with the organisation for 20 or 30 years. Another gentleman celebrated his 40th anniversary with us a couple of weeks ago, and I wrote a little story about him for that.
Oh, no.
But the people come to RACQ and they stay. They really do stay. I've been here for nearly 4 years now. Certainly got no intentions of going anywhere. But I think Yammer it's an exemplar, I think, of the culture that happens in the organisation. Not only is it a great projector of business priorities, which we can talk about a little bit more, but in terms of celebrating individual successes of people, celebrating milestones, celebrating things like a 15th work anniversary.
Would you be able to have those connections if it wasn't for a platform like Yammer?
Look, I mean, I think people would like to think that, phone and email are an adequate substitute, but they're really not. I think people are far more engaged because they can see people having, those working out loud conversations where they're talking about projects, but seeing more of themselves as well. We have, like most networks, we have the dog appreciation groups and the kitten clubs and all of those sorts of things as well. And, I think some of our leaders who perhaps are not quite as engaged with Yammer think that's what Yammer is and it's silly and it's a bit of a distraction. But honestly, people connect over having like dog breeds and then find that they have other things in common and that they're actually working on parallel business projects and are able to support one another in ways that never would have happened if they hadn't met through that initial interaction.
And suddenly you have that two-way relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Andrew, can you tell me a little bit how you're using SWOOP to measure your Yemma network?
We report on a monthly basis to our group executive, and it's part of a submission that goes up to our group exec and ultimately to the board. So we have some pretty generic metrics around overall network engagement and what have you. We track campaigns that we run where Yammer forms a big part of that. So in the internal communications team, we preside over the intranet, we look after our e-newsletter network, all of those sorts of things. But Yammer has continued over the last 12 to 18 months to become a bigger and bigger part of those campaigns. Hashtags are like gold to us. They are a fabulous resource for us to really be able to track true engagement against those sorts of topics. We report back to our clients using the metrics, particularly around things like hashtags, but also interaction across teams as well, to our individual clients to test what's worked really well, to advise them, because I'm an internal communications advisor. A big part of our job is to actually not just do, but to provide meaningful advice to our clients about how things can work better, to test things, to go back to them and report on this was effective, perhaps this could have been done differently. And SWOOP is an invaluable resource for us. The other thing I would say is working for a business that has a bank and insurance company and a huge logistics business in terms of our roadside and towing network, numbers are gold. They absolutely are gold. So to be able to quantify the success of activity happening in Yammer, rather than to simply say, oh, it's great, we've got lots of people talking to each other, but to actually show numbers to accountants, to underwriting experts, to people who can only really see the numbers behind things, it's far more meaningful for them. And it is far more, it's far simpler to talk about a return on effort for their people participating in Yammer if we can actually give them some numbers to show that the impact that it's having.
So providing them with those numbers and those measurements, you're showing that you do have business value from using Yammer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff there that obviously may not come directly under business value, but, you know, like this culture and this pride. But how do you put a dollar on those sorts of things?
Well, that's right. And look,
Yeah.
the next step for us, I think, is to start to assess how groups are interacting with one another. I am looking to use SWOOP to, I guess, identify some hotspots where that activity is really prevalent between businesses business units. It may not be immediately obvious why they would be talking together on Yammer, so that I can then go to those leaders and say, well, what sorts of conversations are you having? I'm hoping that as a consequence of that, I'll find teams are interacting in a way that they might not otherwise do, and I can write some case studies which I can then share on Yammer and I can share elsewhere, and I can actually go to leaders in pockets of the business that perhaps aren't using it Yammer the way we'd like yet, and to be able to say, here is some real business progress, some results that have happened as a consequence of these two units working together.
Yeah, that's great. Andrew, just going back to your new group CEO, what a time to start in a new role and trying to meet 2,500 new employees.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I'm just trying to think, if there was not something like Yammer in place, if you didn't have an enterprise social network in place, how does a CEO, how would they possibly connect with everybody?
It's an excellent question, and thankfully it's not one that we're in a position of having to answer. In saying that, he has been very receptive. We are recording weekly updates with him, videoing those and sharing those via our intranet. So people are seeing his face, starting to see that he's becoming a little bit more familiar with the workings of the organisation. But I think it's been incredibly important for him to be the one who is saying, these are unprecedented times. These are the things that we are doing to prepare as we now start to consider a return to the workplace as well, what that will look like. And he's been very clear in saying, and it'll come as no surprise to anybody, that it won't look the way it did before. The world of work is going to have to change as a consequence of this. I read a funny story. Well, it wasn't a funny story, but I read a news story yesterday, and I think it really resonated with me, the idea that the communal cookie jar will no longer exist. Now, that seems silly on the outset, but what that's really saying is we probably won't be using microwaves. We won't be storing our lunch in the fridge. We have a lot of hot desks. How are we going to manage that? If someone sat at a desk the day before, are people going to be comfortable to sit at it the next day? All of those sorts of things. So I think, and I'm only speculating here, but I suspect that each of us who worked 5 days a week, 8 or 9 hours a day, at a desk every day, that may not be the way going forward for all of us. And I think that we are riding such a crest of a wave in terms of engagement with Yammer at the moment, with more people at home and looking to have that interaction with their peers that they're not having face to face. I think it's a great opportunity for us to really leverage what Yammer might look like in the future, because I think it's going to be very important going forward in whatever the new normal might look like.
And have you found there's been more engagement on Yammer since people started working from home as a way to connect with each other?
Yeah, we have. And I mean, there's been a conscious decision by my team to work with our clients to do things to enable that to happen, but there's been a lot of organic growth as well. By that, what I mean is we are working with our wellbeing team. They've created a virtual health hub, offering a fitness program that people can participate in. We work with a personal trainer who actually runs our in-house gym as well, but he's now offering virtual programs. We have a yoga instructor offering virtual classes as well. And I think it's been wonderful for people who are not seeing each other to actually still be able to engage through a Teams meeting potentially, and have a virtual yoga class with their colleagues and engage with them in that way.
Has there been a clear definition as to when to use Teams and when to use Yammer, or are people a little confused?
I think when it's one-on-one conversations, people are typically using Teams. I think where there are group conversations, I think what we very much encourage, and I know is very much Yammer 101 and advice from you guys at SWOOP as well, is we're really encouraging people to ask questions. We want them to go out there and say, I'm experiencing this, what's your experience been, and generating conversation in that way. So, look, there's probably been a few instances where I've seen things on Yammer and thought maybe they would have been better off handled in Teams. Perhaps I've had some Teams conversations where, with my own clients, I've really encouraged them to say, this is a fabulous conversation, but don't just waste it by sharing it just with me. Get it out there and have
Yeah.
conversations with other people. Tell them what you're doing.
And are people doing that, following
They
that
are.
advice?
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah, some.
Okay,
Some
great.
are. Some are still a little bit reluctant. I think it's always a challenge for people who are not professional communicators, and I often try to take that hat off myself and consider. I don't think twice about quickly punching something out on Yammer and putting it up, and I'm less concerned about whether it is absolutely perfect and more about getting that message out there and hopefully generating engagement. People spend an awful lot of time focusing on, oh, should that be an Oxford comma? Should there be, should I be punctuating, rewriting the sentence 5 times? And then at the end of it going, oh, I'm not confident to do this, and not doing it. So a big thing for me is always to say to people, get out there and enjoy yourself. Have fun with it. Talk to people. Don't focus too much on how you're saying things. Just get out there and say them.
Yeah. And Andrew, I guess this is where those social groups that you were talking about earlier, like the pet groups, the dogs and the cat groups, that's where they really come into their own, because it's a way where people can practice putting safe posts up.
Very good. It is a safe space. You're right. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a topic that people don't have to think too much about, because it is talking about, their new puppy, and I've actually got mine milling around behind me here in the background at the moment. These are things that are close to people's hearts, and they're far less self-conscious about. So you're right, it's a great place for them to start.
Andrew, so obviously we're all in the midst of this, of COVID-19 restrictions at the moment, but in Queensland, restrictions are starting to ease. How will you transition back to work into physical offices and back opening shop fronts? Is that something that you are communicating on Yemma, or you plan to communicate on Yemma, and within Teams as well?
Yeah, well, as you said, it is evolving by the day and by the hour. You're right. There is a plan for a return to school for some year levels next week, and I have 2 children at school myself, so I can certainly appreciate the fact that people with young children are looking forward to, I guess, greater flexibility that'll be available to them rather than having to be home with their children. Well, work is an option, so people further up the food chain within businesses like ours are going, well, what does that actually mean? How can we start to see a staggered return to work? It's early days for me to really say too much about what we think could happen, because frankly, I don't know, and I'm not sure our leaders necessarily do at this stage yet. I think what I said briefly before is that I think the world of work has changed. It won't be the same. I don't think that people will necessarily return to their desks full time, whether it's the same desk or another desk or whatever the case may be. Certainly some will need to, but I don't think they all will. So I think there is a wonderful opportunity for us to use virtual networks like Yammer, like Teams, like some of the other things, to help people keep that connectedness that they might otherwise feel that they have lost during this period of isolation and are looking forward to getting back. It just may happen in a different way.
Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your stories at RACQ on SWOOP Chat. We really appreciate it. And people can contact you in our Yammer user community if they wanted to ask you any more questions.
Oh, please, I'd love that. I mean, I don't use that community well enough to ask questions myself, and you reminding me of it means that I will now do exactly that. Really happy to chat with people. Really, I mean, the best way to learn is to talk to others about what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Andrew.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.